video 2 of our financing series. I am Jen Myers with Jen Runs Real Estate and eXp Realty LLC, and this is Annie Ransom with All Pacific Mortgage, and we are creating a video series to answer some of your most common questions about the lending process as you're thinking about buying a home this next year so that you can feel a little bit more prepared going forward. So thank you for joining me again, Annie. How's it going?
Good. Really good. Yep.
Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about what happens after your offer gets accepted and the next steps with your loan process. So this is the exciting part. The buyer gets the phone call that their offer is accepted, they're moving forward. And there are steps we take on the real estate side, but there are also a lot of steps that we need to be preparing them for on the lending side. So what happens after your client's offer gets accepted and they start moving forward in the transaction?
Sure. A lot. A lot. And we fully prepare our clients on what to expect because the majority of things that happen behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. However, there's some really important things that clients should know about going into that process because we do so much work to get that accepted offer, especially in today's marketplace. And so we want to make sure that the transaction runs nice and smooth. Mm-hmm. So typically what happens first is you send us the purchase agreement so that we understand the terms of that transaction. Mm-hmm. And then my team gets to work, or any lender's team is going to get to work on making sure that we've got updated documentation, that everything's nicely organized so that we can get a clean approval. Mm-hmm. So one of the first things that we're going to do is we work very closely with you and making sure that they get through inspections and that the property is still a great winner. And then we are going to get a value inspection, which is called an appraisal. We want to make sure that it's worth what the client has agreed to purchase the property for. We want to make sure that we're identifying any potential issues that the lender might have with the condition of the home. But assuming everything looks great, then we're moving on to the next step, which is preparing that file for underwriting.
Okay.
So we've selected the program we're moving forward with. We know the terms of the transaction. We know that it meets value. And now we're making sure that we're meeting the investor's requirements in order to close that loan. Mm-hmm. So we get together updated pay stubs, if there's any outstanding financial documentation. We're basically packaging up everything for an underwriter to review. Mm-hmm. That underwriter is typically going to give us a loan approval.
Okay.
Knock on wood, we've never not had an approval. But usually that approval includes a couple of conditions. They're usually pretty minor. Mm-hmm. So things like getting an updated pay stub, making sure that there's homeowner's insurance secured against the property. So we get that loan approval. We request any conditions from the client. Okay. We get it final approved. We order up a big, thick stack of closing documentation. It takes about an hour to complete. And then the lender will fund the loan, meaning they're exchanging the money in the name of the buyer to filter through to the seller. And then the title gets recorded in the buyer's name, and officially the home is theirs.
Perfect. And this process normally takes how many days?
About 30 to 45 days, depending on what the buyer's timelines are and what the seller's timelines are.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So a lot of times as we're going through a transaction and we're looking at things a home needs, a buyer will say, I need a washer and dryer, or I need a fridge. Can I charge these on my credit without it affecting where I'm at with my loan process? So what would you say to that?
Yeah, so there are there's a few common things that come up during a transaction, and opening up new accounts is certainly one of them. In fact, it's at the top of the list.
Yes.
So what I always tell people is if you can avoid it, that's preferable. But if you can't, things come up, life happens, that it's always a really great idea to share that before you make any decisions with your lender to ensure that we continue on through that process smoothly. So one of the areas that we look at is debt versus income. So if you are creating a new debt and there's more money going out expected every month versus money that's coming in, then we want to make sure that we're at an acceptable level before we pull that trigger to ensure that we're not going to run into an issue.
Right.
Yeah. So the other two most common things that come up during a transaction are large cash deposits. So, everybody wants to win the lottery. Everybody wants a rich aunt that's going to give them money towards the purchase. Which those are all great, but we as lenders are federally regulated to paper trail all of the money that goes into a real estate transaction. So if there are large deposits, it's also important to share that with the lender. The most difficult thing is that cash cannot be paper trailed very easily.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not very common, but every now and again we run across somebody who has a bunch of money stashed in a safe. They go and deposit it, and they want to use it towards the down payment of a property. And that can be a little bit more difficult to paper trail. So again, we want to make sure that we've got smooth transactions and that we don't run into any issues.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. And the third area is income or employment changes.
Okay.
So we take a snapshot of somebody's qualifications. So if that income or employment were to change, that snapshot also changes. So we like to know about that ahead of time to ensure that the income that somebody is bringing in, whether it's changing from hourly, salary, commission, bonus income, that's all going to be acceptable to the lender. So if any of those things change, then we want to talk about it and just make sure that we're not going to hit a roadblock halfway through the transaction.
So ultimately, what I'm also hearing is that communication is so important. Communication with all of the team members so that there are no surprises, or if anything does pop up, we can work through it.
Totally. I tell people that it's a team both ways. So it's really important that clients communicate with us, and it's really important that we communicate with the client so they know what's expected, what's going to happen before it happens, and obviously making sure that everything looks great along the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's touch really quickly on the very final piece of the lending portion as we're heading into closing, the closing disclosure.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how it works?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of disclosures that happen from day one, getting into contract, throughout the rest of, until they get keys in hand. And those disclosures are really important. I always tell people, you're going to see everything in a disclosure form. So once it comes time to actually sign on the dotted line, you've already seen all of the terms. That allows people to be very prepared for this very large purchase that they're making, and that they understand all of those terms along the way. One of the disclosures that happens at the very end is called a closing disclosure. The government requires that we show all of the final terms in a real estate transaction or a mortgage transaction, so that a client sees all of the final fees, the interest rates, how much they're borrowing, and so on. They will sign that form, and the government requires that there's a 3-day waiting period before they're eligible to sign all of their final sign on the dotted line documentation that's set in stone. That just ensures that the client has had ample time to review it, that they're evaluating this final decision, and so on. So it's really important that people keep on top of disclosures throughout the transaction, because the disclosures come along with a timeline. So that closing disclosure needs to be signed, and then the 3-day waiting period starts before they can sign any final loan documentation. I think that's really important for people to know too, because it affects our closing date. It's not something that we can just close right away once we've met all of the conditions. We still have this final piece that we have to account for that's really important. Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you chatting with me today about it. I think that's a lot of great information, and will definitely help buyers out there kind of understand from start to finish what the process looks like. So thank you so much for chatting with us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks.